Eagle 7 focusing on Middle East, one of the most explosive regions in the world, offering a biblical and prophetic perspective to the daily news events that shape our world, with a particular focus on Israel and the Middle East. Managing events of live broadcast or published report of news. Messianic information about current events. This may be provided through many different media: word of mouth, printing, postal systems, broadcasting, electronic communication, or through the testimony of observers and witnesses to events. End-time prophecy with a question: will there be peace in the Middle East? Eagle 7 Focus hope to get connected with you in that prophetic dots between God's plan for mankind, Israel, and today's news. News from Israel, the Middle East, and the world, and Messianic believers in Yeshua around the world.
The 1967 Arab-Israeli War, which in Israel and the history books is often referred to as the Six-Day War, and which Palestinians have come to call Al-Naksa, or the setback to war, and the lines of dispute drawn in its aftermath, remain at the heart of the ongoing Israeli-Palestinian conflict to this day, and in many ways still provide the contours of the long-stalled peace process. The conflict broke out on June 5, 1967, and was fought between Israel and neighboring
Egypt, Jordan, and Syria. As a main result of this war, hundreds of thousands of Palestinians were displaced from their villages and towns,
setting the stage for decades of intractable conflict that still affect the current lives and the future generations of both Palestinians and Israelis. The war led to the Israeli capture of the Gaza Strip and Sinai Peninsula from Egypt, the West Bank and East Jerusalem from Jordan, and the Golan Heights from Syria. The memory of this war is a dividing line, and reflections on this anniversary are conceived differently by Palestinians and Israelis. Loss versus winning, tragedy versus victory, and the insecurity of displacement versus the security of conquest. The Six-Day War was a brief but bloody conflict fought in June 1967 between Israel and the Arab states of Egypt, Syria, and Jordan. Following years of diplomatic friction and skirmishes between Israel and its neighbors, Israel Defense Forces launched preemptive airstrikes that crippled the air forces of Egypt and its allies. Israel then staged a successful ground offensive and seized the Sinai Peninsula and the Gaza Strip from Egypt, the West Bank and East Jerusalem from Jordan, and the Golan Heights from Syria. The brief war ended with the UN-brokered ceasefire, but it significantly altered the map of the Mideast and gave rise to lingering geopolitical friction. Here's how the Six-Day War changed the map of the Middle East. The Six-Day War came on the heels of several decades of political tension and military conflict between Israel and the Arab states. In 1948, following disputes surrounding the founding of Israel, a coalition of Arab nations had launched a failed invasion of the nascent Jewish state as part of the First Arab-Israeli War. A second major conflict known as the Suez Crisis erupted in 1956, when Israel, the United Kingdom, and France staged a controversial attack on Egypt in response to Egyptian President Gamal Abdel Nasser's nationalization of the Suez Canal. An era of relative calm prevailed in the Middle East during the late 1950s and the early 1960s, but the political situation continued to rest on a knife edge. Arab leaders were aggrieved by their military losses and the hundreds of thousands of Palestinian refugees created by Israel's victory in the 1948 war. A series of border disputes were the major spark for the Six-Day War. By the mid-1960s, Syrian-backed Palestinian guerrillas had begun staging attacks across the Israeli border, provoking reprisal raids from the Israel Defense Forces. In April 1967, the skirmishes worsened after Israel and Syria fought a ferocious air and artillery engagement, in which 6 Syrian fighter jets were destroyed. In the wake of the April air battle, the Soviet Union provided Egypt with intelligence that Israel was moving troops to its northern border with Syria in preparation for a full-scale invasion. The information was inaccurate, but it nevertheless stirred Egyptian President Gamal Abdel Nasser into action. In a show of support for his Syrian allies, he ordered Egyptian forces to advance into the Sinai Peninsula, where they expelled a United Nations peacekeeping force that had been guarding the border with Israel for over a decade. The plan never materialized, however, and by early June 1967, Israeli leaders had voted to counter the Arab military buildup by launching a preemptive strike. On June 5, 1967, the Israel Defense Forces initiated Operation Focus, a coordinated aerial attack on Egypt. That morning, some 200 aircraft took off from Israel and swooped west over the Mediterranean before converging on Egypt from the north. After catching the Egyptians by surprise, they assaulted 18 different airfields and eliminated roughly 90% of the Egyptian Air Force as it sat on the ground, and this started of 6 days' war.
Thank you for joining us here in Jerusalem. As I'm sure you have noticed, the worship song was in Hebrew, Arabic, and English. That is because we at One for Israel believe that true peace in the Middle East can only happen through the Prince of Peace, Yeshua the Messiah. May we please ask you to take a few seconds right now and pray for Jews and Arabs to come to know Yeshua, the only way to peace. Thank you, and God bless.